Ladies and gentlemen, you're very, very welcome. There may be a few stragglers, as we say, who will join us in due course. You are all extremely welcome to this Europe-Israel Press Association briefing. My name is Alex Benjamin. I'm the director of Europe-Israel Press Association. And Happy New Year to you. Hope everyone is safe and well as we start 2021. And we're discussing today the challenges of the pandemic and terrorism and what changing trends and future concerns we have going forward. We're delighted to have two eminent experts on the subject. Professor BOAZ GANOR is the founder and executive director of the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism, the ICT, and the Ronald S. Lauder Chair for Counter-Terrorism at the Interdisciplinary Center, which for understandable reasons is shortened to IDC in Herzliya in Israel. Herzliya might be familiar to some of you who cover security matters, as it's an eminent and very important seat for discussing security and terrorist challenges. He also previously served for 5 years as Dean and 10 years as Deputy Dean of the Lauder School of Government, Diplomacy and Strategy at the IDC in Herzliya. So when we say we have experts, in the case of Professor BOAZ GANOR, it's definitely the case. Also definitely the case is with LAURENCE BINDNER. She's the co-founder of JOS Project, platform of extremist and terrorist propaganda analysis. Laurence's research focuses on the spread of terrorist and extremist groups' propaganda, as well as their rhetoric. She's a member of the UNCTED Global Research Network, and her articles are published frequently by the French Institute of International Relations and the ICCT, the International Center for Counter-Terrorism at The Hague. Obviously, as well, Laurence was extremely busy in France after the recent terror attacks, and particularly the brutal murder of Samuel Paty, where the debate about incitement and jihadism in France has been raging. So with that by way of introduction, before we get into the actual briefing itself, I'd be extremely grateful for those of you who have questions for either of our distinguished speakers, if you can use the chat facility, identify yourselves from your name and outlet. And I don't necessarily need to know the question in advance, but just that you'd like to ask a question. And then once each of our speakers has given their sort of introductory remarks, we can get into the meat and the back and forth. So with all of that said, without further ado, Professor GANOR, would you like to say a few introductory remarks? And you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure. I was given at most 15 minutes for introductory remarks. It takes me more to start my engines, but I'll try to obey as much as an Israeli can obey orders. I will try to obey the order and stay within the 15 minutes that you gave me, Alex. So what do I want to do actually, and what do I want to share with you in those 15 minutes? I would like to speak about few generic concepts of terrorism, which I think it's important for us to understand when we discuss current trends, and that's the second tier of discussion I want to conduct. What are the current trends of global terrorism that the international community face, that Europe face today? And looking ahead, what can we expect in 2021 and maybe further than that? So very briefly, I will go over that. Of course, at the Q&A, I will be more than happy to elaborate on any one of those subject matters or any other subject matter that has to do with terrorism and counterterrorism. The first generic concept I would like to introduce to you is the typology of the perpetrators of terrorism globally, generically, into three types of or prototypes of perpetrators. The first one is what we call, the nickname that we give to that phenomenon is the lone wolves. Who are the lone wolves? Those are the individual attackers that are conducting a terrorist attack, usually by the inspiration coming from a terrorist organization. In the scholarly community, in the security community, there is a big debate if the term lone wolf really suits the phenomenon. Many says, of course not, because they are not lonely, and that's true. But I use the term because it's very common, because everybody understands what I'm talking about, but also because I would like to stress that those independent attackers do not have any operational ties to a terrorist organization. Of course, if you would arrest them before they conduct the attack and interview them, they would say, I'm ISIS, I'm Hamas, I'm Al-Qaeda. But practically, they have never been recruited to a terrorist organization, they have never been trained by the terrorist organization, and they didn't get operational support from the organization. They just identify with the organization and its goals. The second prototype of perpetrators of attack, it's what I call the local independent network. Now, what is the local independent network? And what I'm going to say would be regarded as contradiction in terms. This is a group of lone wolves. What does this mean? Those are 2 or more, usually a small group of 3, 4, 5 people that have been radicalized together, usually online. And one day they decide to conduct an attack based on this radicalization. In most cases, when we're talking about this network, it has to do with family members, cousins, brothers, or close friends that have been radicalized together, and they decide to commit the attack. Like the lone wolves, they do not have any operational ties to a terrorist organization, although in many cases they are being inspired by this or the other terrorist organization. The third type of attacks is what we call the organized attack, or the third prototype, the organized attacks. What are those organized attacks? Those are cells of terrorist organizations that are being sent to their mission by the organization. We're talking about a group of people that have been recruited by the organization, trained by the organization, and sent to their mission by the organization. For example, 9/11, and many, many other types of attacks altogether. Why do I start my discussion with you today by suggesting to differ between those 3 groups? Because the phenomenon is totally different when we are speaking about those terrorists. In many cases, the modus operandi has different variations, and certainly the counter-terrorism efforts needs to be different in reference to those 3 groups. So that's the generic concept I wanted actually to start with and to share with you. Few words about the lone wolf phenomenon, because unfortunately it's not a new phenomenon, but unfortunately it's a growing phenomenon. It's a growing threat in the world altogether. We saw a huge wave of lone wolves attacks in Israel between 2015 to 2017, but it's also challenging United States, Australia, New Zealand, and of course, Europe, among many, many other continents and states. So the lone wolf phenomenon, I would suggest, and today it resonates with what we know, I would suggest to refer to that as an epidemic phenomenon. In a way, like the corona is an epidemic phenomenon, because it's contingent. And you see that when one person is conducting a lone wolf attack, others might imitate that. Actually, in many cases, they will be exposed to the incitement. We have Laurence here with us, who's an expert on propaganda and incitement. And when we are talking about this type of incitement and propaganda that provoke many others to conduct those attacks, again, the concept of epidemic is very relevant, because the incitement is spreading from one person to many others, cross-border phenomenon, exponential phenomenon, and of course, it's posing a lot of common challenges in contending with this idea. I would be more than happy to elaborate on that if you would like later on. So the lone wolf phenomenon is a growing phenomenon. I have good news and bad news in reference to that specific phenomenon. The good news is that in most cases, and of course there are exceptions, niche attack, for example, was an exception. But in most cases, the lone wolf is contained, meaning is not as lethal as organized terrorism, not like 9/11 or suicide attacks and so on and so forth. Lone wolves, in most cases, are using cold weapons. Sometimes they use guns or automatic weapons, but in most cases, they're using knives or screws, or actually taking their car and conducting a random attack, an accident, and practically killing people by running over them. That's the good news. The bad news is that it's very difficult to prevent such an attack, because you don't have the preparation stage in which you have in organized terrorism. Purchasing the weapon, training on the weapons, collecting intelligence, and so on and so forth. All of those has a signature radar. It's an intelligence radar signature that is lacking when we are talking about the lone wolf phenomenon. And the lone wolf phenomenon actually led to a breakdown in intelligence, or intelligence modus operandi, in contending with those issues. Having this in mind, we see in recent years a reform, or if you wish, even an intelligence revolution, in which intelligence services start to use a lot the open sources intelligence on top of human intelligence and communication intelligence. Because of the lone wolf phenomenon, they found out that maybe it's better for them to use open sources information, social networks information, and other types. And all of that is, of course, having a fusion within the new capabilities of AI, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. This is a different discussion. I will not get into it unless you would like it, because it poses a lot of benefits, but also a lot of costs at the same time. So having those ideas in mind, what are the current trends in global terrorism and in Europe in this regard? I would like to differ between ISIS and Al-Qaeda on that matter. As for ISIS, in the recent years, what we see is ISIS suffering from losing its hybridity. ISIS used to be a hybrid terrorist organization, meaning a terrorist organization that controlled both territory and population. As such, he has many concerns on top of just conducting terrorist attacks. He has to supply services to the people that they control, see that they are obedient, and so many other concerns altogether. Since they lost the territory, most of the territory in Syria and Iraq, they have different concerns. Actually, it's a different creature now. This is more like a classical terrorist organization than a hybrid terrorist organization. And that's also led to a decline in their capability to conduct terrorist attacks. I'm saying decline, it's not null, they practically still are very dangerous. To that, you should add the consequences of the Corona crisis that also limit the capability of all the terrorist organizations, including ISIS as well. How come? Because we have lockdowns, because it's forbidden to open crowded places, because the air travel now is very limited, because crossing borders, even in Europe, which used to be a very easy thing, now it's a different challenge. And because, with all due respect to the victims of terrorism, when you have hundreds of people dying in every state on a daily basis from coronavirus, well, if you inflict a terror attack that will kill 3 people, it doesn't have the impact, the media impact that it used to be in the past. All of that actually led to a decline. And of course, the terrorists are also suffering from coronavirus, and all of that led to a decrease in the level of terrorism, especially in Western countries altogether. Looking ahead to 2021 and further than that, hoping and believing that we are going to be vaccinated and the situation will stabilize again, I do believe that 2021 will see the rise again of the phenomenon of global terrorism in general, and ISIS terrorism in particular, because for ISIS, it's very crucial to make an impact, especially now when they lost the territory, when they lost the caliphate. They need to show that they exist and they are strong. And I think they will be very interested in conducting a strategic terrorist attack. I don't want to say something along the lines of 9/11, but as big as they can in order to send the message, we are here and we are still active. The second group I want to refer to is Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda, we all know, suffered also a huge decline for the last more than a decade, actually, after 9/11. But now they see an opportunity. Now they see that the ISIS ISIS decrease of power created a vacuum, and they are very interested to fill in the vacuum and actually to become the new fashion, or the old fashion that returns and becomes the new fashion altogether. How can they do that? Well, they use a lot of proxies in different parts of the world. Most of those proxies actually change their loyalty through the years from Al-Qaeda to ISIS. They would like to see them going back to the home base, to the Al-Qaeda. But the epicenter is very interesting. And I'm sure that you read Mr. Pompeo's speech yesterday, and it goes exactly into that. The world is not very much aware to the fact that Iran, since 2002, I would say, became one of the main hubs of the epicenter of ISIS. The reason is because when the American troops, or the coalition troops, invaded into Afghanistan after 9/11, many of the leaders of Al-Qaeda fled to Iran, hoping that Iran would become a shelter, and Iran became a shelter. At first, for a few years, they monitored very aggressively, I would say, Al-Qaeda activists. Some of them were arrested. After that, they were freed, and then they gave them shelter. Through the years, they moved or were transferred into a tool in the hand of the Revolutionary Guards. And the epicenter now in Iran is controlled by, the epicenter of Al-Qaeda is controlled by Iran, by the Revolutionary Guard, and it might be used in the future, it will be used in the future, in my view, for the two purposes that Iran is very active in, which is state-sponsored terrorism and subversive activity in different countries, especially in the Middle East, but not just in the Middle East altogether. We saw the case of actually second in command, the Abu Muhammad al-Masri, being killed in August in Tehran streets, which actually shed a light on that phenomenon in many cases. For Iran, these relations with Al-Qaeda is very convenient because it gives them the ability to disassociate themselves from activities, from terrorist attacks that will be conducted by Al-Qaeda in the future. We are Shiites, they are Sunnis, and so on and so forth, but between you and me, it's not a new phenomenon that Iran is supporting a Sunni terrorist organization and not just Shiites. Of course, they actually created and used them as marionette Hezbollah, which is a Shiite terrorist organization, but Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the Palestinian arena is tightly connected to Iran, getting support for many years from Iran and being monitored by Iran. So Al-Qaeda is actually not really a deviation of that concept that Iran, as the Shiite republic, having relations with and supporting and promoting Sunni terrorism as well. Here again, looking ahead, 2021 and further than that, I think that we would see the rise of Iranian state-sponsored terrorism all over the world, including might be in Europe. They still would like to revenge the killing of Soleimani, the head of the Revolutionary Guards, and Fakhrizadeh, but they are now holding back because they're afraid from the retaliation that probably would come in that case by Trump. They might use their capabilities, and I remind you, the capabilities are Hezbollah, Shiite militias all over the Middle East, Houthis in Yemen, and Al-Qaeda, and of course, Palestinian terrorist organization. All those capabilities, in my view, in the coming year will be used in order to pressure the new American administration to come as fast as possible, as weak as possible in a way, to the strategic discussion with Iran in order to renew the nuclear deal. No doubt that terrorism and subversive activity will be part of the leverage that they would try to have on United States, maybe even on Europe. Two other phenomena, and I will conclude with that very briefly. One is after the stabilizing the situation of the corona in Europe, in the world, I think that we will see a wave of lone wolves attacks. I think that ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other organizations will try to push them forward. It will be easier for them because people will have much more despair because of the economical crisis, because of the lack of trust in government, because of conspiracy theories, and so on and so forth. And the last phenomenon that also I think we would see a rise in 2021 would be of, again, not a new phenomenon, but a growing phenomenon even before the crisis, the coronavirus crisis, and this is right-wing terrorism or far-right terrorism. We saw this rise, which is still growing, spreading all over the world: New Zealand, Christchurch, United States, Europe, Scandinavia, you name it. And those elements are very active as we speak right now online. They are, again, using all of those suffering and conspiracies that are online today in reference to the coronavirus. And we also found that they are very interested in trying to use the coronavirus, and they are telling their followers, to those which are infected with coronavirus, to use that as a weapon in order to conflict, harm, to have a contingent effect on security apparatuses, on police departments, and so on and so forth. So to sum up, I do believe that counterterrorism experts would definitely not be unemployed in the coming year. We are going to see a raise. This is under the assumption that coronavirus would be contained, and on that matter, I'm optimistic. But if it will, I think that simultaneously we will see a raise in the phenomenon of global and local terrorism, both jihadi terrorism and far-right terrorism. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ganor. I don't usually do this, but we have a journalist who has to leave in literally about a minute and a half. So I'm going to go straight before I come to you, Laurence, to hear your perspectives. Sabine Arnaud from Challenges or Challenge in Paris and France. Sabine, I'm giving you the floor now for your question.
Thank you very much. Hello to everybody. Sorry to disturb the process. I wanted to know if the attack in Vienna was a game changer in the preventing terrorism and in the global work together to prevent terrorism. Thank you very much.
The answer is no. Actually, it was a problematic attack. It was, as far as I know, a lone wolf attack, although, as I said before, even when we talk about lone wolf, they have associates, they are getting support from others and so on and so forth, but it was not an organized attack coming from a terrorist organization or a person that was recruited to a terrorist organization and conducted the attack. Actually, when you analyze the attack itself, you see that they follow, or he followed actually the guidelines that was published way back by ISIS to lone wolves, how to conduct an attack like that. For example, one of the things that they teach those lone wolves is to wear a phony suicide belt. And the reason is because by having a suicide belt, they are deterring both civilians in the immediate surrounding, but also police from shooting at them or from stopping them because they're afraid that they will blow up. Time and again, we see that they're using that, and that was a concrete recommendation given by ISIS to their followers. They also gave other guidelines, but it was not relevant to the Vienna attack. It was more relevant to the Germany attack, how to use trucks and which type of trucks in order to ram on people. And that was the conclusions that they took from the Nice attack and taught others. And the attack in Germany, in Berlin, I believe, it was actually a clear follow-up of this Nice attack. So going back to your question, no, I don't think it's a new phenomenon. I think it's another step or another stage within the current growing phenomenon of lone wolves. If this is posing a challenge, definitely it's posing a challenge, as the whole phenomenon posing a challenge, because let me explain that. What's the main problem in countering lone wolves? How does intelligence work in general? Intelligence work on the ability of the intelligence apparatuses or agencies to intercept a discussion. You and me are planning an attack and we are having a discussion. Intelligence apparatuses need to intercept such a discussion. How? Either by human, which is human intelligence, meaning they have a source next to me, listening to me, and they reports to the intelligence what I was talking with you, or they are listening to this Zoom conversation. This is communication intelligence, and they know what we're planning to do. When we're talking about lone wolves, usually there is no discussion because everything starts and ends with the sick mind of one person. And in those cases, intelligence is practically incapable of intercepting the attack. But on the other hand, all of those lone wolves has to give, has to publicize the reason. Why did they do that, their motivation? Because if they won't publicize their motivation, they will be regarded just as criminal. The worst things that can happen to a terrorist is if you refer to him as a pure criminal that doesn't really have a justification, altruist motives, and so on and so forth. So they need to publish that. How do they publish that? They publish that on the social network before they conduct the attack, because after the attack, they either are dying or being arrested. They need to do it before the attack. And that's a golden opportunity for the intelligence to intercept their intentions. This is why open source intelligence, this is why big data and machine learning became so powerful in contending with this specific type of an attack.
Thank you very much, Laurence. You have been extremely patient. We thank you for that. I also speak for our organization when we say we have the utmost respect for anyone who has devoted their lives to uncovering and exploring some of the darkest recesses that exist in the world today, namely dark web and other places. So really, thank you so much for the work that you do. Laurence, you've heard what Mr. Ganor had to say. Would be honored and privileged to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Alex. If Sabine is still here, maybe I would add something about the Vienna attack, but I think she left. So
we're recording the video anyway, so whatever you say, we will forward to Sabine anyway.
Okay. First of all, I totally concur with what Professor Ganor answered her. It's clearly for me either not a game changer. I think there are two important things with this attack. It's an attack that came after 3 attacks in France that were a little bit different from the former attacks that were more. Maybe we'll talk about it later also, that were more religious terrorism and not maybe jihadist terrorism. But the timing of the Vienna attack is interesting because on the very morning of the attack, the attacker shared the ancient video of Charlie Hebdo attack of 2015. So maybe, and I'm just making allegations here, but maybe the events in France with the republication of the caricatures had an influence on the timing of his attack. And second thing I wanted to add is that it's how we say that once again an attack with a rifle on the European soil, not with a rudimentary weapon, and we know now that it has inspired another cell that was arrested last week in Spain. 3 people were arrested in Barcelona, and 1 people has been arrested in France. And we know that these people, one of them joined ISIS, was expelled from Turkey, went to Senegal, from Senegal to Algeria, from Algeria to Spain. And we know that these people wanted to carry out a terror attack resembling to that in Vienna. So it's a sort of, resuming a sort of maybe a larger scale terrorism at the time where we have seen mainly attacks with rudimentary weapons. Okay, now I'll get back to the introductory remarks I wanted to make regarding to COVID-19 and propaganda, and I'll try I'll stick to 15 minutes. I'm not sure that French people are more obedient than Israelis, but I will stick to 15 minutes. So I'll mainly talk about jihadism, but also the extreme right-wing sphere that will, of course, sometimes overlap with conspiracy theories. Okay, so first, what was the reaction of terrorist group at the beginning of the pandemic? We note that, as it is often the case, extremist and terrorist organizations they read the developing pandemic through the lens of their preferred, privileged narratives. Of course, their propaganda has enough flexibility, enough plasticity to adapt to circumstances, and they manage to shape these narratives to the event here linked to COVID. And as expected, these events fed their narratives and were used by them to confirm that their vision of the world is a true vision. So at the beginning, all of us, we were all taken aback by the scale of the virus, and many were in demand for an explanation, with some cognitive need for an explanation. Where did the virus come from? Why now? How did it reach Europe? Why is it so lethal, etc.? And what is interesting is that we can draw a parallel in the type of interpretation that were made by the jihadist sphere and the far-right sphere, insofar as both have rejected the scientific, the rational explanation to explain the phenomenon, instead of admitting that the virus was the result of a series of circumstances, natural causes, and natural events. So on the one side, the jihadists explained the virus by religion. It was the will of God. And on the other side, on the ex-right-wing side, the virus was accounted for by the action of men, and especially the finding of scapegoats that were the origin of all this. And so actually in the rejection of rationality, that is actually the secular side of the coin. On the one side you have God, on the other side you have men. So it's interesting to find common features, but the two visions of course, are here very much in opposition. And we can note also that ISIS wrote an op-ed in its weekly Annaba propaganda newsletter, rejecting conspiracy theories regarding the virus, and mocking the people that would say that the United States or China was at the origin of the virus, because actually the United States are not omnipotent, and it's of course allowed that it is at the origin of all these issues. So there was a consensus among a jihadist group that the situation was the consequence of the will of God, and that it was a divine punishment, be it against Western countries or Muslim apostate countries. And so the punishment was a revenge of God against man. For instance, ISIS sympathizers saw in the timing of the pandemic the 1-year anniversary of the fall of BOAZ, which was the last ISIS territorial bastion, stronghold, and the punishment against ISIS enemies. Al-Qaeda also saw it as a punishment against Western countries, and it was a punishment for people that did not follow through the true path, through Islam, through religion, and of course against apostate governments, apostate leaders. And of course, now the conclusion that they drew were different according to the group, and let's say to the level of radicality, the nuance of ideology, and the difference of strategy. What did ISIS say? ISIS advised its sympathizers to profit from the situation, from the saturation and the overload of hospitals, to profit from the vulnerability of institutions, to take actions and to carry out attacks. So the advice was quite simple. And on its side, Al-Qaeda had a different approach. It encouraged its audience to profit from the time of the lockdown, to profit from the availability of the people to read authentic sources with, of course, the aim to increase the sympathy for its cause and to gain the hearts and minds of the Ummah, etc. So, of course, these differences in conclusions are the incarnation of the differences between ISIS and Al-Qaeda strategy, ideology, recruitment, and of course, the propaganda embodies these different visions. And so that was the jihadist side. On the at the other end of the spectrum, on the right wing, extreme right wing side, we have seen an increase of the blaming of elites, of minorities, of migrants, of foreigners, of Jews, with a very significant surge of demonization, deshumanization, and most of all, conspiracy theories. And so, as Professor Ganor mentioned, there was incitement to call on minorities, to call on the police, to weaponize the virus. And of course, these people were rejoicing that liberal democracies were in pain, and they were wishing for the total and the final collapse of this society, and to rebuild a new one afterwards. So in a complete accelerationist vision and a hope for chaos. So this was of course expected, because the mechanism of propaganda is often like that. You have a certain vision of the world, and the events that occurred are read through these lenses and through this prism. And the COVID event came to post-rationalize this view. And actually, not only the COVID, propaganda read the events that occurred after the COVID, like, for instance, the protest in the United States. It's interesting to see how jihadist group interpreted these Black Lives Matter protest as a continuation and as a consequence of the COVID crisis, with still those differences of interpretation between ISIS and Al-Qaeda, with ISIS saying that the religion is the only possible stability, only possible redemption, and Al-Qaeda trying to interfere and trying to capitalize on racial tensions in the United States, and trying to position itself as the defender of the weak, and capitalizing on discrimination, and trying to gain support from the population. So I want also to concur on what Professor Ganor mentioned about the fertile ground that this crisis, I mean the coronavirus crisis, is highlighting, and all the anxiety, the distrust towards the elites, the distrust towards government, and also one thing that is quite important is that the time that people are spending online is also more important than before. And I mean, social links that are broken because of lockdowns, because of restrictions of leisure, of restaurants, bars that are closed. Some people are trying to recreate these social links online, to recreate a sense of belonging, and of course, radical ideologies might really benefit from this phenomenon. So I'll be happy to expand on more things, but I think that what we are seeing in the longer term here is because of this COVID crisis, we risk to see a higher risk for fragmentation, from a polarization of the society, and distrust towards the institution, towards the government, and towards democracy in general. And of course, when there is such a distrust, it encourages political violence, and it encourages alternative visions, alternative social projects, and alternative models. And of course, radical groups, jihadists or far-right groups, will do their best to exploit that and to benefit from that.
Laurence, thank you so much for that analysis, important analysis. Coming straight off the back of something that you just mentioned about what happened in DC and the far right, we have a question from Aurora Minguez. Aurora is from Spanish National Radio and also RTVE in Spain, which is the sort of BBC, if you like, of Spain, if I can say such a thing. So Aurora, if you'd like to ask Laurence your question, and you asked another question on vaccines, but if I may, I'll come and ask you to ask that one to Mr. Ganor straight after your question to Laurence. Aurora. Aurora Minguez, there we go. We can't hear you for whatever reason. Would you like me to ask your question? If I don't, okay. So in which case I will ask the question on behalf of Aurora. The question, Laurence, is she'd like to know how you see the danger of President Trump destabilizing America and the rest of the world after leaving the White House. How dangerous is the extreme right in the USA after the Capitol assault?
Wow, this is a large question, and I think I'll rather we would try to focus on one specific aspect of this issue, which was the influence that President Trump had on the internet and the deplatformization that he was subject to, like a sort of digital impeachment by Twitter that was then followed by Facebook and many other platforms. And so I'll maybe say a few words. Oh, I can.
Aurora, you're with us now. Okay, please continue, Laurence.
Okay. So I think that mutatis mutandis, it's not exactly the same phenomenon as jihadist deplatformization, but I think that what we can learn from jihadist deplatformization is interesting. Last year, in November 2019, there was an important operation by Europol and Telegram to chase ISIS from Telegram. Telegram has been a preferred platform of ISIS since 2016, end of 2016, when they were deplatformized from Twitter, Facebook, and mainstream social media. They found a safe haven in Telegram, and they were not really disrupted, and they gained a certain audience, etc. So what Europol and Telegram did in November 2019 is that they deleted channels, deleted groups, they deleted accounts, they deleted many things. And the operation was not short-lived, it was sustained. It lasted many months, and it's still ongoing now. It's still difficult for a jihadist group to have a long-standing group or channel, ISIS linked and even Al-Qaeda linked, now on Telegram. So there were, this operation had two effects: positive effects and negative effects. The positive effect was that there was a disruption of trust from ISIS sympathizers. A lot of people were kind of lost. Where do I find my fellow jihadists? Where do I find propaganda? Where to go, etc., etc. Because what happened when they were deplatformized from Telegram is that they rushed to smaller platforms, alternative platforms, and it created a large atomization, a large fragmentation of propaganda across the web. So it was very difficult to monitor all these platforms, to see where the propaganda was coming from. Other positive effect is that they were also making mistakes on the use of new platforms, that some of them were less secure than Telegram, etc., etc. So some audience also was less motivated, and they didn't follow, they stopped following ISIS. Only the most motivated went on and tried to find propaganda elements. So that was the positive effects, but there were also negative effects of this deplatformization. First, analysts, journalists, but also intelligence services, most probably, lost tracks of jihadists. There were more platforms to monitor, more fragmentation, more automation, and more camouflage from the guys that were, I mean, the sympathizers that were staying online, the digital soldiers of the media, as they call them, digital mujahideen, the media of the munasirin, and also more pressure on the surface web. So I think that we globally it was a positive operation, but I think that we also have to be cautious with this operation. And this operation against ISIS had a large consensus. Now, regarding what happened with Trump, I think that the timing of, I mean, I'm not in the skin of Jack Dorsey, Twitter's president, but I think that what happened to Trump on Twitter was the result of a series. I mean, it was the latest stages of a series of developments and sort of fights between Trump and social media, and his tweets have been deleted. There were some warnings about some of his assertion being linked to fake news, etc. So there is this, growing tension. There was the Capitol events that, in my sense, was trauma for American people. So a threshold was crossed, I think, in his encouragement to go to the Capitol, and of course now the Congress is. I mean, Biden is now more or less in power, so it's less dangerous to delete Trump's account. So it's a combination of factors. What is going to happen next with Trump supporters? I don't know. He hasn't been tweeting for 3 days. He has an account on AltTech, so alternative platform of the alt-right, on Gab, on Parler, on Telegram. He hasn't said anything, and we have seen a huge rush of his supporters on this platform in the recent days. It's not like ISIS. I mean, he had 88 million followers on Twitter, so it's not going to be the same containment phenomenon, and we can also see the rise of a sort of alternative internet linked to the alt-right and the American X-right wing conspiracy, Boogaloo Boys, Proud Boys, etc. So I think it's a very complex issues. I think there's also a matter of accountability. We know that the spokesman of the Taliban still has a Twitter account. We know that the former Prime Minister of Malaysia that called to kill French people after the republication of the caricatures didn't get his account deleted, etc. So I think that it's a complicated issue, and there are inside there are politics, there are legal issues, there are technical issues, and we have to see what's happening now. Where do these supporters go, on which platform?
Okay, thank you, Laurence. Mr. Ganor, thank you for your patience, which isn't something we say very often to an Israeli, but a very, very interesting question that Aurora Minguez just asked Laurence, and she has another one for you, which I'm going to read. Would terrorists attack vaccine laboratories or steal envoys, considering the distribution is going to be mostly in rich countries? So do you believe that there is any credible threat for these terrorists to start targeting the likes of Pfizer or others?
Thank you, Aurora and Alex. I will be very brief. First of all, I definitely do not want to induce any ideas into the hands of the terrorists. Not that they need me for that purpose. They have a sick mind of their own. I definitely don't need to contribute to that. But to speculate based on that question, I would say the following: what what does terrorists want? Terrorists want to spread fear and anxiety. Terrorists would like to have public attention. Terrorists would like to harm innocent people. Now, when you have those three goals that leads to different types of modus operandi, each and every one of you should ask the question, does attacking the vaccine chain in Western countries fits those specific goals? Unfortunately, I'm afraid that the answer is yes, but not that there is a shortage of other potential targets of modus operandi for them to conduct the attack or any attack.
Thank you, boys. Just wanted to get into some meat here as well. Recently, you made a couple of comments. One, so let's look at Europe's response to terrorism generally. You said, how can we create effective counter-terrorism measures when Europe can't really agree on its own definition of what terrorism actually is? And you drew a parallel with COVID in the sense of, you know, there's been some disagreement on what any restrictions should be over COVID. Well, if they can't agree on restrictions over COVID, what hope is there for restrictions on terrorism? And as an add-on to that, if I may, a very interesting question which comes up frequently, and Laurence kind of touched upon it as well when we were talking about social media issues and the role of social media companies. Is it, or you've said, and I guess it's an Israeli thing, that in order occasionally to protect a democracy, you have to set aside a few values in order to do so. Can you elaborate on that a bit and what needs to be done in Europe?
Thank you, Alex. Let me start by making a short comparison between those two pandemics. And I do believe that we are talking about two pandemics, not similar, but definitely have many common denominators. And I refer to the global jihadi terrorism pandemic and to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, both cases, we see two phenomena that are very dangerous, kill people, sometimes in large numbers. That's one common denominator. They, as I said before, they are contingent. One person might lead to others, few others actually, to conduct further terrorist attacks. The contingent concept has to do with incitement that give birth or breed terrorism, and of course to the wave of lone wolves by imitating the success of other terrorists. So it's contingent and it's exponential. Two phenomena, another common denominator, which are exponential and they are cross-border. Borders, they don't really care about the borders because it moves from one country to the other country. If you take, for example, incitement for terrorism, one person is sitting somewhere, say in Africa, is using an online platform that is being based in United States, and they incite people in Europe, no meaning of territories or borders altogether. Both of them creates an impact, an extreme impact of fear and anxiety. People are terrified from the coronavirus, people are terrified from terrorism. It changed the way of life of people all the time. Both of them has economical consequences, enormous economical consequences. Billions and billions of dollars were spent for security measures as an outcome of the terrorist attacks. And now we see how much money is being spent for medical treatment of the coronavirus. And last but not least, is the collapse of governmental system. The whole idea of the terrorists at the end of the day is to create mistrust in the system, in the political system, in democracy as a regime. And that's what is happening also in coronavirus. All the governments, I believe, are facing a challenge of obedience and trust. But more interesting are the counterterrorism measures. And that goes back to your question, Alex. When we are talking about countermeasures in terrorism, we always have what we call this dilemma or tension between efficiency in counterterrorism and guarding liberal democratic values at the same time. We call it the democratic dilemma in counterterrorism. There are people that tend to turn a blind eye to the fact that there is a tension between those two ends. It could be counterterrorism experts that doesn't really concern human rights, civil rights, and so on and so forth, and they are saying, we are serving the right of the people to live. This is the most important right, and I do not want to limit this right by a tendency to keep other rights altogether. On the other hand, you have human rights activists that doesn't really understand why there is a need to fight terrorism, and they are all into just protecting human rights. At the end of the day, the challenge is finding the right balance, finding the threshold that will be balanced in a way that you know that you have to sacrifice some of your efficiency in counterterrorism in order to guard your fundamental liberal democratic values. You don't want to lose them, because if you lose them, you're playing into the hands of the terrorists. But at the same time, you need to remember that in order to give the right of the people to live, in order to preserve their security, sometimes you need to sacrifice some of those values, at least for a temporary period of time. Now, the same dilemma I find today in countering COVID-19. Exactly the same dilemma. The question of privacy. The government is intruding to our privacy, questioning us, where have we been, who did we meet, and so on and so forth. In some places, like Israel, for example, they are using counterterrorism technology in order to trace where infected people are, and so on and so forth. So that's another challenge in this democratic dilemma. The right of the people to move from one place to another place, to create a crowd, to fly, and so on and so forth. All of those are being limited as an outcome of the need to fight or to contend with COVID-19. In both cases, the democratic dilemma in counterterrorism and the democratic dilemma in fighting COVID-19, the whole story is about finding the right balances, checks and balances all together. And we find many common denominators in that concept as well. For example, the need for international cooperation. What's the meaning of counterterrorism today if you don't have international cooperation? As said before, it's cross-border. You cannot fight effectively terrorism in France without having a whole EU policy and capabilities, or even working together with the United States or with Israel or with Australia or with some moderate Arab countries and so on and so forth. It has to be hand in hand. The same thing is in contending with the COVID-19. I mean, if tomorrow morning France would find a way to solve the problem in France, but Germany will still suffer from an enormous wave of COVID-19, in no time, the situation will deteriorate in France or other countries altogether. International cooperation is again crucial. And last but not least, is working with specific fragile communities. When we are talking about counterterrorism in Europe, it's so important to find a way to work with, say, immigrants communities, which they suffer from those trends that give birth to those extremists, which are small minority within the community, but still they have the responsibility to trace them and to counter them. That's what the government expects them to do. That's what the government needs to do in order to help them to do all of the above. Yeah. The same thing is with the fragile communities that suffer more than others from COVID-19. For example, the elderly that need special attention, special support from the government, and so on and so forth. In Israel, for example, we have the ultra-Orthodox Jews that because of the way of life, they suffer much more from the coronavirus and they are more infected than others. You need to work with the lay leaders of those communities. So many similarities and common denominators, although, of course, those are different phenomenon, terrorism is an outcome of bad intentions of human beings to inflict harm on others, and COVID-19 is a natural disaster that we are all suffering from the same phenomenon.
Thank you, BOAZ. Laurence, I'm going to come back to you because I was listening attentively to what you said about the whole question of censorship, and particularly the idea you spoke about that there were some jihadist groups who were shut down, and there's a danger that you alluded to that they're no longer in plain sight, that effectively when you do that, it's the equivalent of just turning the lights off. You have no idea where these people are. How does one find a balance here? And second question to that as well is, are we dealing primarily with a phenomenon which is in Western countries? Because we do have some journalists online from, and I'm looking at some of the names here, from Central and Eastern Europe. And I know from my experience being lucky enough to be married to a Czech lady that these aren't conversations that happen in the Czech Republic. This is not something in the discourse. Why not, God forbid, of course, but why not for Czech Republic? Why not Romania? Why is it always in France or Germany or Spain or more Western countries that we're dealing with this particular phenomenon? So those two. Laurence, sorry, you'll have to take yourself off mute. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, your first question is, of course, a key question. How to find a balance between deletion and not losing track of the people you are tracking, monitoring, following. But interestingly, it's also a very big issue for them. I mean, the issue for terrorists, terrorist organization is the fight of the weak against the strong. This is true for what's happening in theater, on the theater of operation, with this insurgency tactics, hiding, camouflage, hit and run attacks, etc. What's happening online is we can draw parallel with insurgency tactics online. They have a trade-off between making their propaganda emerge, because they need to have a propaganda of the deeds to so that the people are aware of what they do. If you carry out a terror attack, but you have absolutely no media about it, no mediatic echo about it, then it's not worth for the cause you're fighting for. So they have to emerge on the media, on the web. They have to make their actions public. But on the other side, they also have to remain under the radar, not to be censored. So there is a continuum going and forth. In French, we say balancier, between the surface and the hiding, and so for them also this is a very big dilemma, and they have to find an equilibrium, a balance between these two elements. Now, how do we do? I think it's a matter of fine-tuning. It's a matter of a very thin reflection, and it's also a matter of strategy and of discussion between several stakeholders. You have the intelligence that need to infiltrate for a long time. You have the judiciary power that need to feed their judiciary forms and to gather as much elements as possible. Now you have the police that want to arrest people. And actually online, you have the same dilemma as offline when you infiltrate a cell or a group. Should we arrest the guys now, or should we wait until we can make a larger arrest? So I think that little by little, we are gaining a sort of wisdom on it. We are not going to eradicate the propaganda from the internet. It's not true. We will never do that. But I think that the best we can do is to lock them down. I mean, I know we are comparing COVID and terrorism, but we can make them into lockdown and contain them in some parts of the web that where they have very few contacts with the large public. And we made a huge progress since let's say 2015, where everything was public on Facebook and Twitter, and now they are still available. And of course, there is still a huge margin of progress, but much less than before. To answer your second question, and I hope that the Czech Republic is never going to be under the wave of attack that we have been through. There are both some specificities of countries and no specificities. France, I think, is a very special case because it has a special history, and I mean, it became like the United States of America, it's sort of Grand Satan for jihadist and radical Islamist groups, because we have this specific stance towards secularity that even Anglo-Saxon people sometimes don't understand and take for Islamophobia, which of course is not. It's just the product of our history and our history towards the church, Christianity, etc. So there is this issue with secularity. There is French action at the geopolitical level, the colonial past. So France is regularly accused of being paternalist, of stealing resources of Muslim countries, of trying to eradicate Muslim identities, and many things like that. And last but not least, there is this specific French attitude, a provocative attitude, and irrespectfulness towards clerics, towards religion in general, that is, of course, now called the Esprit Charlie, but it's just now that it's called like that. But it was, of course, it's not a recent phenomenon. So France is something apart, but I think that we are not attacked for what we do. We are more attacked for what we are. And in the mind of jihadists and radical Islamists, France and its ally, and UK, Swiss Republic, Czechoslovakia, there has been an attack in Switzerland. There has been an attack in Vienna. There is no specific secularity in Vienna. So they see the Western world as a whole, and I think that no country might ever be spared one day. I hope I'm wrong, but of course some countries have more chances to be struck, but some other might not be. And the Czech Republic is sending troops in Takuba in the Sahel. So of course, this is not going to be forgotten by Al-Qaeda, by Jenim, Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam al-Muslimin, which is the Al-Qaeda branch in Mali. I mean, the press is talking about it, that the Czech Republic is sending soldiers there. It's not going to be forgotten. It's going to be an additional grievance toward the Western world.
Okay, thank you. Very, very interesting analysis there. I mean, yeah, you've touched upon some of the issues, and somebody pointed out to me privately, as we were asking the question, that of course a lot of these countries don't necessarily have the same levels of Muslim populations, never mind migrants, which is probably a fairly large factor. Boaz, coming back to you, and we'll start to wrap things up soon. This is a question from Jesper from the Swedish Svenska Dagbladet, which is, I just mangled that, I do apologize. It's the main Swedish, one of the main Swedish newspapers. Could you give a successful example of a vulnerable group who've been able to stop and counter terror and extremism within that group? So are there any examples, Mr. Ganor, of successful examples of vulnerable groups who've been able to stop and counter terror extremism?
Well, I'm not so sure I fully understand which type of inner process, if the group is a state or the group is a group, but nevertheless, we saw and we still see among many terrorist organizations and many communities, I should say, internal rivalries based on the question of what is right and what is wrong. I mean, terrorists, most of them, has moral considerations. They have different morality than we are in many cases, but still the question is there. You know, I was once met a Palestinian terrorist in the jail, an archi-terrorist. He was in prison for many years. And we had, in his own cell, we had a discussion about what is right and what is wrong. And he, of course, blamed the Israeli occupation for their activities. And I've asked him, without getting into a political debate, I've asked him, based on your morality, is there something which is wrong, something which you should not do because of your own religious, cultural value system? He thought for a minute and he said, yeah, probably you're trying to tell me that I should not deliberately attack civilians. I said, yes, that's actually the way I define terrorism. Terrorism is the deliberate use of violence aimed against civilian targets in order to achieve political ends. I said, but there are no civilians in Israel. You are all military personnel. Even your kids will grow to become soldiers. The elderly people have served in the army. That's why you are all a legitimate military target. But then I wasn't surprised with this answer. But then he surprised me with another part of the answer. He said, yes, but still I have my own limits, moral limits. And I said, what is your limit? He said, I would never deliberately attack kids. Now, he did attack kids. He was responsible for a suicide attack that attacked many kids. But nevertheless, even in his own mind, he has some moral restraints. What I'm trying to say here, that we need to find those embryonic moral restraints and considerations, and we need to let their own communities to deal with that. You know, there was this question that was posed to my friend and colleague Laurence about the right-wing extremism, the events in the Capitol and so on and so forth. And I have to say that those events led me to think about what is right and what is wrong morally from a right-wing point of view. We are all the time coming to the Muslim communities in the Western countries, in Europe, in Scandinavia, and other places, including myself. And we say, look, guys, we don't blame you, of course. We don't blame Islam, but you have a responsibility. You need to identify those bad seeds and to uproot them. We cannot do it for you. And I'm saying the same thing about right-wing, extreme right-wing. I mean, to be a right-winger, it's a legitimate political standing. I cannot say what is right, and of course I have my own views, but there are many even radical, conservative, right-wing views which democracy can and should live with. But then the question is, where does the red line cross? Where and when it becomes illegitimate? That's the question that I posed to myself when I was listening to President Trump's speech just before the riots in the Capitol. Did he cross that or not? I don't have a clear answer. I have my own views on that, but I think we are all, as Westerners, as liberals, at least even right-wingers that believe in liberal democratic values, we need to ask our questions, the question what is right and what is wrong, what is legitimate and what is not. And once we have this in mind, based on the definition of terrorism, you asked me before about the definition of terrorism, then we can identify the terrorism among us, and we can work to de-radicalize them, to prevent the radicalization, and if it's not possible, actually to prevent them with operative measures and not just by education.
Laurence, looks like you wanted to jump in on the tail of that one. I could be wrong, but it looked like you wanted to come off the back, or I was wrong.
No, I was just approving.
Okay.
I was just concurring.
Well, well, I'm glad that the mic is on, because I'm going to come straight to you, Laurence, because Jesper from the main Swedish Daily has a question specifically for you. He says, many people think that closing extremist accounts on Twitter or Parler will lead to more violence from the extremists. Is there any actual evidence of that? And what are the consequences when jihadist accounts on Telegram were shut down?
Yes. Okay. Two things to say here. First thing, no, actually, when Facebook, Twitter, or then later Telegram shut down jihadist account, there was not more, it didn't generate more violence, because these guys were already very violent and they were expecting that. And so it came as a confirmation of their expectations. And they see themselves as mujahideen of the media, soldiers of the media. So it was actually not a big surprise. Once again, it's also an online war and an online insurrection. But what we have noticed, and this was like in 2015, when they were taken out of Twitter, they were very active on Twitter, and their accounts were shut down. And we have seen in the migration from Twitter to encrypted applications, we have seen a more radical speech of the average guy. Less people, but the people that made the effort to gather on smaller platform, more confidential platform, made an effort, and these guys were more radicalized. And we see that on the X-right wing at another level, much more significant. I have seen myself people that arrived on Gab or on other types of platform and saying, now I can say everything I want against blacks, Jews, and Arabic, and let's spit to their face, etc. So it's totally disinhibited. They feel that they are all powerful there. They're not going to be censored. On mainstream social media, there is still this sort of caution and self-censorship not to draw the line, the red line, as Professor Ganor said, or the threshold. So yes, it generates a more violent language, and yes, there is, of course, the more the language is violent, the more it legitimates, and the more it puts you into the mind of violent action. So I would say that the answer is yes. In that case, in the case of X-right wing, yes. Okay,
well, we're gonna start to wrap up here. Just one more quick question for you, Mr. Ganor, from Belgium. The question is, ISIS lost all their territory, and that's where they were operating from. Where are they operating from now?
Well, they didn't lose all the territory. Still, there are enclaves they are still controlling in Syria and in Iraq, but they were scattered, and they moved to different parts of the world. They are looking for a place to build a new caliphate. They are looking at North Africa, Libya. They are looking in other countries in Africa, such as Mali, and of course, Southeast Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan area. and so on and so forth. And as said before, they are still having a presence in Iraq and Syria. But this is a very dangerous time because they're transforming. ISIS was one of the most dangerous terrorist organization in history, but this was the devil we know. At least we knew where they are. We knew what was the power. We knew where the different coalitions could fight against them. I mean, the Russian coalition, the American coalition, and so on and so forth. Today, they are more elusive, which make them more dangerous. And they are more under the radar and not on the radar of the intelligence. I tend to believe that in the coming years, we would see what will be the outcome of that transformation process. It might be that they would be able to establish a new caliphate state in another part of the world. By the way, another area that they're looking into is next to Israel, the south of Israel, Sinai Peninsula, which they have a presence there as well, and it's not very well controlled by the Egyptians. So they might be able to establish a new caliphate state in a different part of the world, or create a bigger enclave that they will call a caliphate state somewhere in the borders between Iraq and Syria. It might be that they will go back and become a classical under the radar terrorist organization, like a network that will from time to time pop up with organized attacks. And it might be, as they do it right now, that the main focus would be giving work to Laurence, meaning using the online surface in order to incite, in order to provoke, in order to inspire many followers and many believers in other parts of the world, and they would see themselves just as the engine that actually push forward this effort. The other option is that they would even decline further than the situation now, further than that. And the previous fashion, Al-Qaeda, would fill in the vacuum. And the last option is that instead of, the vacuum will not be filled by the old fashion, but a new fashion will emerge. And instead of ISIS, we will have Shmisis, or another organization with another name that would carry on the global jihadi ideological concepts with other leaders, maybe with other different modus operandis, and they would be the new fashion that those masses that in the past supported Al-Qaeda and then changed their loyalty towards ISIS would in the future change their loyalty to this new incoming global jihadist phenomenon.
Thank you, Boaz. Laurence, you obviously keep an eye on, and your specialism is sort of jihadism and that kind of radicalization. The question is now, after what occurred at the Capitol, of course it was a shock to many of us, but people are legitimately asking the question, are you going to be stepping up any monitoring, or is this process already underway? The kind of radicalization, anti-democratic forces, if you like, under the auspices of, ironically, defending democracy, are we likely to see any of this making its way over to Europe? I mean, we saw a whiff of it when we saw some of the far-right groups trying to attack the Bundestag, but can we see more of this radicalization, more of this kind of discussions happening on European soil, in your opinion?
Of course, definitely. Definitely, there has been a statement by Mr. Nunez a few weeks ago, saying that recently French authorities have foiled 5 terror attacks from the extreme right. And so it's expanding. In 2016, the former head of French DGSI, Calvin, the French MI5, stated that his fear was not so much jihadism, but the risk of confrontation between communities in France. This was in 2015, and of course, since that time, the authorities have monitored the growth, the larger influence, and the activities of these, we call it ultra-droite, which is the violent side of the extreme right in France. There have been some attacks in Germany. There is neo-Nazi propaganda in French and in France, and it's of course a growing risk that is very much fed both by in reaction to jihadist terrorism, and also with the recent event of the COVID, with the growing, I mean, the significant growth. It's not just a small growth; it's a significant growth of conspiracy theories that have fed these groups, and the arrival of the QAnon sphere in France, that we have seen a sort of, you know, embedment and overlaps of narratives and of online activities with these QAnon and conspiracists and the extreme right and neo-Nazis that are using QAnon narratives to feed their own narrative and to gain a public and an audience. So yes, it's something definitely that should worry us.
Thank you, Laurence. And BOAZ, just on that, and as a kind of last question, it's a question from Pedro Gonzalez. Coming straight off the back of what Laurence said, could you see countries like China and Russia, who have arguably, you know, been involved in promulgating some of this online activity to their advantage, could you actually see them moving out of that sort of sphere and actively supporting some kind of terrorism in their geopolitical fight against the Western world?
You know, with the white hair that I still have on my head, I've learned through the years that never say never. But still, I think that my answer is negative in reference to those two examples. A, in reference to China, yes, China has some kind of colonialist goal, but this is more economical in mind. The idea of Belt and Road policy is large investments, creating influence, and so on and so forth. It's not using terrorist proxies for promoting Chinese interest. As for Russia, USSR, of course, was deeply engaged in global terrorism in the 70s, in the 60s, in early 80s. But I don't see them going back to use terrorist proxies to promote their interests. They, as far as I know, officially or not officially, are using other source of influence, but this is mainly cyber activity, using cyber influence activity, I would say, with avatars and other technologies. That by doing that, they are promoting their interests in different parts of the world, but not by using terrorist organizations.
Okay. Well, Mr. Ganor, on that note, Madame Bindner, would like to thank you so much for your expertise, for your candor, for explaining things so clearly and succinctly, and to both of you for doing the job that you do in these challenging times. Thank you. I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of the journalists and people online here that it's been an extremely enlightening and important discussion. And we thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we get to catch you further down the road, and we'll see what develops. I'm sure this is something that we'll regrettably have to still keep talking about in years to come. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Many thanks.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll forward you all the full video in in due course, the full recording of this, if it helps you with your writing or your broadcast pieces. So thank you, and we'll see you again for another briefing. Okay, bye-bye.
Merci à toutes et à tous.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.